Growing up, Saturday was a day for chores. When I was young, I'd wake up early and go watch some Saturday morning cartoons before the chores began. But as I got older, sleep became much more important than television. But that also meant that I was no longer up and ready when chores were beginning. My dad, he would play music very loudly so that there was nothing you could do in that house besides respond to its call. Typically, it was Billy Joel, or maybe some smooth jazz, or if my mother got her way, it was disco or some swing music like Manhattan Transfer, if any of you remember them. The expectation was that when you heard the music, when you heard this siren song, you would report for duty, you would be handed a curated list of what your chores were for the day, and then nothing else could be done until those chores were done. But as I said, I'm also very fond of sleeping. And I could sleep through a lot, but something about the song River of Dreams just pierced my subconscious. I'd awake, but in that moment, I'd have a choice. Do I lie here, motionless, eyes closed, and do my best to ignore the crooning of Billy Joel? Or do I rise and respond to the call? More times than I'd like to admit, I forced my parents to come up and rouse me from my feigned slumber, which I'm sure was their favorite thing to do. We're in an interesting time in our archdiocese right now. We are not only dispensed from attending Mass on Sundays, but you can't even come if you wanted to. I want to ensure you that we are still saying Masses for you and for your intentions. Masses have not stopped, but for contagion reasons, we have barred them from being open to the public. Now, in our spiritual tradition of the Church, our relationship with God is filled with both times of consolation, periods of time when we can really sense God's love present in our lives, and desolations, periods of time when God feels distant. And I'm sure you've all experienced these things to one extent or another. There are these moments when we know God is real, when these consolations set us on fire and give us the drive, that desire, that zeal to pursue God and His ways. It's the general rule of graces from God that God never gives us tough situations without first providing the graces needed to respond accordingly. And the times of consolation are times to really soak in all those graces. Just as God said to Samuel, "Fill up your horn, for you're about to be sent," so too are we filled with the graces so that we may be sent into mission and able for those times of desolation. Because we also all experience those times of desolation, when God feels distant, even when we are saying all our prayers and doing all the things that are supposed to be done, we just aren't feeling the love of God wash upon us. These moments of desolation, long periods when our faith is not always supported by consolation, are meant to purify our love of God, lest we only love God because it gives those good feelings. Our love for God shouldn't be conditional, based on whether we're feeling it or not. God's love for us is constant and unconditional, and so should our love for God be. Thus, God gives us these times of desolation when we don't feel His presence, so that we don't grow attached to the good feelings, the gifts of God, but rather we can say with certainty that we love the giver of these gifts. As Job says, "The Lord gives and the Lord takes away." We accept good things from God. Should we not also accept evil? With evil being nothing but the lack of a good that should be. Extended periods of desolation are referred to by the mystic John of the Cross as nights. Nights are a normal part of the journey towards God, for we must learn to have faith and trust God even when we don't see or feel Him. John of the Cross spoke of a night of the senses, when the warm fuzzies of consolations are withdrawn by God. He also spoke of the night of the Spirit, when the Lord allows us to share in a portion of the sufferings of Christ, so that we will continue to choose God even when the going gets tough. While what we're experiencing now in our diocese isn't really either of these things, we are experiencing our own sort of night, a night of the Mass. While the real presence of God is still available in tabernacles and adoration chapels around the Archdiocese, the ability to receive him in communion at Mass is gone for a time. Throughout history, many times and in many places, the people of God have gone long periods without having the Eucharist. Typically, this is because of an absence of priests. The church in Japan went 300 years without a single priest, yet they still endured and even grew throughout the generations of persecution. Oddly, we have priests, but due to other extenuating circumstances, public masses are not an option. We as a culture have gotten so used to having Mass, even daily Mass, just readily available. This time at that church, this time at that church, all times of the day. But now that this isn't an option, I see people everywhere floundering, saying, what do we do? There's no Mass, no religious education, no Christ Renews His Parish, no men's and women's groups, no Divine Mercy Chaplet, no Stations of the Cross. First Communion has been postponed. What is left of our faith? Your faith is like a tree planted in you at baptism. It's one of those baby trees that's supported by iron rods and stakes that are keeping you from being blown over by the wind. But now the stakes have been removed. The structures that are keeping your faith upright are gone. You're freestanding for a bit. What are you going to do? Are you going to keel over and give up? Were the stakes the only thing keeping you upright? Was the Mass the only thing keeping you Catholic? And I get that. Growing up outside of prayer before dinner and doing religious education in youth groups, really, Sunday Mass was the only time I prayed or connected with God or His church. I don't know what I would have done if Mass was gone when I was younger. Or maybe your faith has been nurtured well enough that you can stand on your own for a time. But as time goes on, you become weary. Maybe we've just become so used to everything being done for us, forcing Mother Church to feed us lest we spiritually starve, that like an animal raised in captivity or a spoiled child, when left to fend for ourselves, we struggle for a bit, only then to crash and burn. Now, the Church, our mother, doesn't desire any of this for us. She, like a good mother, desires that we will be well fed and cared for, that our faith will bear much fruit for Christ. But right now, Mother Church is limited in her capacity to do this for us. We can't rely on the church to have our faith for us. We must take our faith and our spiritual growth and make it our own. And we should be helping others to do the same. I understand the irony of proclaiming this message in a video that will only be watched by those with enough spiritual fortitude to seek out of their own volition nourishment from the church, as there's not even an obligation to watch this or to pray with us. But that's the point. We are to be children of the light, with God as our Father and His bride, the church, as our mother. At baptism, we were born in light to bring light to darkness, and the dark of the night that surrounds us is growing ever darker. But if our surroundings are so dark, that should only magnify the light of the Spirit that lives within us. And as Paul says, awake, O sleeper. This is a wake-up call. The light of the gospel has pierced your subconscious and calls you to arise from your spiritual slumber. We have a choice here in this moment. How do we respond? Do we roll over, ignoring the call that echoes in our ears, pretending to continue to live as though we once did, forcing mother and father to get us out of bed? Or do we, of our own will, respond to God's call and begin to take our spiritual lives seriously? Because yes, the Mass is temporarily gone, but you know what's not gone? Our ability to pray, our ability to fast, our ability to do works of charity, the things that are pleasing to God. You and I were baptized priest, prophet, and king. We must use those gifts. What better way for us to show the gift giver that we appreciate and love all that He has given us than to use those gifts to the full? To take the light of Christ, the light of faith given to us at our baptism, and to boldly carry that torch into this dark night. At the end of the gospel, some Pharisees following Christ asked if he thought that they were blind as well. Jesus tells them that if they were blind, if they were truly asleep and ignorant, then they would have no sin. But if their eyes were open to the reality of who Jesus is, if they have been woken, but choose to close their eyes, to roll over, and to feign sleep of ignorance, then their sin remains. Brothers and sisters, do not roll over. Do not close your eyes for fear of the darkness closing in. Rise up, children of God. Rise up, you children of light. Rise up, saints of God. For the night may be long, but there is much work to be done. And the sun desires to rise again, not from outside, but within us. And only then, as Samuel prophesied, only after the son of Jesse, the King of Kings, the anointed, the Christ, is present among us, only then will the sacrificial meal, the sacrificial banquet, the Mass, truly begin.